Bevor man eine Frage beantwortet, sollte man immer erst eine Pfeife anzünden. Before I answer the question, where is a global crisis, the next global crisis is going to hit, I have to go through some of what the data is showing recently. For essentially all of the recorded history, the Arctic Ocean has been one of the least navigable bodies of water on the planet, sealed under ice for most or all of the year, closed to the shipping routes that carry the modern global economy. That is no longer reliably true, and the rate at which it's changing is faster than even climate scientists projected only a few years ago. The core physical fact is stark. Recent research indicates the annual rate of Arctic sea ice loss has been more than tripled since the 1990s. That is not a gradual linear trend. It is an acceleration, and it is opening a navigable season along Arctic sea routes. That, within living memory, simply didn't exist for commercial shipping. This single physical change is now cascading into economics, resource access, and infrastructure planning across multiple industries and multiple countries simultaneously. A clean example of how a change is one physical system ripples outward into engineering and economic systems built on the top of it. As Arctic ice retreats, it is exposing terrain and seabed that were previously locked away from any form of resource assessment or extraction, including deposits of oil, natural gas, and critical minerals, several of which are essential inputs for the same technology and energy transition industries we have discussed elsewhere in those videos. Greenland has emerged as a particular focal point, with mining companies pursuing rare earth element projects as melting ice clears access to previously unreachable terrain. These minerals matter well beyond the Arctic itself. Rare earth elements are essential components in every form of electric vehicle motors to precision-guided electronics to magnets used in offshore wind turbines, making Arctic deposits commercially relevant to industries with no direct Arctic presence at all. The shipping economics case for Arctic routes is, on paper, compelling. Analysis estimates that using Arctic sea routes instead of the traditional Suez Canal corridor could reduce costs by up to 30% on certain container routes between Asia and Europe, driven primarily by significantly shorter transit distances. Fewer days at sea means lower fuel costs and faster inventory turnover for the goods being shipped. That economic case has already attracted real infrastructure investment, new icebreaker fleets, expanded Arctic port facilities, and specialized vessel constructions, concentrated particularly along the Northern Sea route running along the Russian Arctic coastline, which currently offers the most developed navigation and icebreaker sport infrastructure in the region. The engineering reality is considerably more complicated than the cost per container math suggests. Arctic waters remain remote, poorly charged in places, and served by extremely limited search and rescue infrastructure, meaning any accident carries a materially higher risk profile than an equivalent incident along an established shipping corridor. Operating conditions demand specialized ice-capable vessels and specifically trained crews, both of which are expensive and currently in short supply relative to demand. And the region's political and regulatory framework remains genuinely unsettled, with multiple nations holding overlapping interests in resource rights, navigation rules, and infrastructure development. Analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies have described the traditional rules-based framework governing the region as increasingly strained. I will note directly here the specific territorial and sovereignty question shaping that framework are matters for policymakers and international law, not an engineering or economic analysis. What is relevant for our purposes is simply that this regulatory uncertainty is in itself a real operational risk factor for any company or country planning long-term Arctic investment. The Arctic is also one of the most environmentally fragile regions on Earth, and that fragility is not a side note to this story. It is a central constraint on how any of this development can responsibly proceed. Increased shipping traffic raises genuine risk of oil spills, disturbance to marine mammal populations, and to introduction of invasive species into an ecosystem with very little resilience margin. Proposed mitigations, seasonal navigation limits, strict environmental standards for vessels, coordinated international oversight, are technologically and technically sound, but scientists studying the region are candid that even carefully managed development crisis risk precisely because the underlying environment is already changing faster than regulatory framework can adapt. This is in miniature one of the defining engineering and policy tensions of our era. A genuine economic opportunity opening as a direct consequence of an environmental change nobody wanted in a location that can least afford additional stress. The Arctic is offering a rare, almost uncomfortable case study, a single physical process, retreating ice, simultaneously creating economic opportunity and environmental risk, commercial incentive and regulatory uncertainty, all in one of the most remote and fragile places on the planet. How that tension gets resolved over the next decade, we will say a great deal about whether we're capable of building resource strategy that accounts for its own consequences rather than simply following the map as it changes. I hope this was an eye-opener to the crisis that about to hit, already hitting in those parts of the world where the Arctic is, and I'm looking forward to your questions, your queries. Make sure I'll read every one of them, and let us make it an interactive discussion. Looking forward to welcome you in the next video. Thank you so much for your presence, and I wish to see you in the next video.